What if I told you the iconic Volkswagen Beetle has a dark past tied to Nazi Germany? Hard to believe, right? Buckle up, because today we're uncovering how Volkswagen was involved in some shocking crimes during World War II. Let's dive into this disturbing history. Let's be honest, when you think of Volkswagen, they probably imagine the classic Beetle or maybe the WW bus, right? You picture road trips, peace signs, and maybe the quirky ads from the 60s, but here's a question for you. Did you know that Volkswagen has a history tied to Nazi Germany and World War II? Yup, the brand that many of us associate with freedom and adventure actually has some pretty dark roots. Really? Yes, really. So let's take a trip back in time to the 1930s, when Volkswagen was first born. Now it all started with one man's vision, Adolf Hitler. Crazy, right? Hitler wanted to create a people's car, or as they say in German, a Volkswagen. His goal was simple, build a car that the average German family could afford. He was trying to make cars more accessible to the people, which doesn't sound too bad on the surface, does it? But hang on, it gets dark really fast. Hitler was trying to show off Germany's technological power and build national pride, especially after the country had been humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. He wanted to prove that Germany could compete with the likes of the United States, where Ford's Model T was already a huge success. But here's the twist. Hitler wasn't just about making cars for the people, he had a much bigger, more dangerous plan. Hitler tapped one of Germany's top engineers, Ferdinand Porsche, yes, that Porsche, to design this new car. Porsche was no stranger to innovative car design, and he got to work immediately. The result? A small, durable car that could seat a family of 5. This car was designed to be cheap and easy to mass produce, and it later became what we now know as the Volkswagen Beetle. Sound familiar? But hold on, here's where the story turns. As World War II kicked off in 1939, Volkswagen's destiny took a darker path. Instead of becoming a symbol of everyday life for Germans, Volkswagen's Wolfsburg factory, the heart of production, was converted into a key part of the Nazi war machine. That's right, Volkswagen stopped making civilian cars and instead began churning out military vehicles for the Nazi regime. So, what kind of vehicles did they make? Well, Volkswagen designed and produced military machines like the Kubelwagen and Schwimmwagen, vehicles designed to transport soldiers and military equipment, not families. The Wolfsburg factory became one of the biggest suppliers of these vehicles, and this was all done in service of Nazi Germany's war effort. But that's not even the worst part of the story. Here's where things get really disturbing. With so many German men off fighting in the war, there weren't enough workers to keep production going. So what did Volkswagen do? They turned to forced labor. Yes, they used forced labor on a massive scale, and it's horrifying to think about the conditions these workers were subjected to. Most of them weren't even German. They were prisoners of war, civilians from occupied countries, and people from concentration camps. But it wasn't just about numbers. The conditions were beyond brutal. These laborers, torn from their homes and forced into work, were nothing short of slaves in the Nazi war machine. They were starved, beaten, and worked until their bodies gave out. The factory floors were often so dangerous and unsanitary that injuries and deaths became a daily occurrence. Workers lived in cramped barracks near the factory, freezing in winter and roasting in summer. Many were so weak that they couldn't even stand, yet they were still forced to toil away on Volkswagen's production lines. This was industrial-scale cruelty driven by a company that profited off their suffering. And if that wasn't bad enough, Volkswagen even built something called a Kinderheim, which translates to children's home. But don't let the name fool you, this wasn't a place of care. This facility housed the babies of female forced laborers, many of whom were raped by Nazi soldiers. The children were left in squalid conditions, barely fed, and most of them died of starvation or disease. It's estimated that between 365 and 400 babies died in the Kinderheim. Can you imagine that? This was all happening at a car factory. Imagine this for a second. You're a prisoner of war, taken from your homeland, or worse, a victim of Nazi persecution in a concentration camp. You're starving, overworked, and forced to build vehicles that would help a regime responsible for untold atrocities. The conditions were brutal. These forced laborers, who numbered in the tens of thousands, worked 12-hour shifts in unsafe conditions, were barely fed, and were often beaten. This wasn't just a small operation. Volkswagen had multiple forced labor camps set up near their Wolfsburg factory, and at one point, they were using workers from 4 concentration camps. And while these laborers were being worked to the bone, guess who was profiting? That's right, Volkswagen. They were getting rich off war contracts while exploiting people in ways that are just impossible to comprehend. Yet, after the war ended, you might think they were held accountable for their actions, right? Well, not exactly. When the war was over and Germany was in ruins, Volkswagen's factory was badly damaged by Allied bombing. The Nazi regime collapsed, but the Wolfsburg factory remained standing, and instead of facing justice, Volkswagen got a second chance. The British Army took control of the Wolfsburg plant and actually helped rebuild it. Really? Yes, it's true. A British officer named Major Ivan Hurst saw potential in the wrecked factory and helped kickstart production again. the British military needed cars, and Hearst figured Volkswagen could provide them. Under Hearst's leadership, Volkswagen was transformed from a wartime factory to a civilian car manufacturer. The Beetle, which had originally been designed under Hitler's orders, suddenly became a symbol of post-war recovery. Imagine that a car that had its roots in Nazi Germany was now being sold as a cute, affordable vehicle for families all over Europe. By the 1950s, Volkswagen had managed to distance itself from its dark past, and the Beetle had become an international icon. But here's a question: did Volkswagen ever pay for the crimes they committed during World War II? You'd think that after using forced labor and being involved in such horrific acts, they would face some serious consequences, right? Well, not exactly. For decades, Volkswagen didn't really talk about what happened during the war. They kept things quiet. It wasn't until the 1990s that the company publicly acknowledged its role in the use of forced labor during World War II. After pressure mounted from survivors and historians, Volkswagen finally admitted its involvement in Nazi war crimes and agreed to contribute to a compensation fund for forced laborers. This fund, established in the year 2000, was meant to provide some level of reparation for those who suffered under Volkswagen's exploitation. But let's be real, can any amount of money ever truly make up for what those people went through? But here's the thing, Volkswagen wasn't alone in this. During World War II, many major companies were complicit in the Nazi regime's atrocities, including other German firms like Siemens, Bayer, and IG Farben. These companies all benefited from forced labor and war contracts, helping to fuel the Nazi war machine. It wasn't just Volkswagen that exploited vulnerable people to line their pockets. The dark truth is that much of Germany's wartime industry relied on this exploitation, which further complicates how we view these companies today. The tangled web of complicity raises uncomfortable questions about what responsibility modern corporations have for their past actions. Should we hold them accountable now for what happened over 80 years ago? Or do we accept that the passage of time has shifted the responsibility to governments and institutions to reckon with history? It's a moral dilemma with no easy answers. And yet, even as we continue to uncover these hidden histories, it's important to remember how the legacies of these companies live on. Volkswagen, for instance, has become one of the largest automobile manufacturers in the world, with a reach that spans continents and generations. It's a testament to how businesses can adapt, grow, and thrive, but at what cost? By remembering Volkswagen's origins, we're reminded that history has layers, some of which are painful to peel back. So, as we drive into the future, we must always keep an eye on the rearview mirror, because the road we travel today is paved with the choices we made long ago. Every car, every innovation, every new technology is built upon the foundation of history, and sometimes that history is far darker than we realize. Even today, Volkswagen's World War II history casts a shadow over the company. Sure, they've made efforts to acknowledge the past, but it's important that we don't forget. Volkswagen may be a global giant now, producing cars for millions of people, but the brand's legacy is forever linked to one of the darkest periods in human history. It's a story of transformation, yes, but also of moral compromise. Volkswagen went from being a key part of Hitler's war machine to becoming a beloved car company in the post-war era. But should we just move on from what happened during the war? That's up to you to decide. The past is the past, but it's always important to remember where things started, especially when it comes to a story like this one. So the next time you see a Volkswagen Beetle driving down the road, you might think twice about the history behind it. It's a reminder that even something as seemingly innocent as a car can have a story rooted in darkness. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you found this story as shocking as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden truths. Let us know in the comments, did you know about Volkswagen's dark past? Let's keep the conversation going.